Sienna had been packing her bag to leave when he said it. "Stay until I fall asleep." She stopped moving. For words, quiet enough to miss, from a man who had, in 3 weeks of evening visits, never once asked her for anything he hadn't already decided he could manage alone. A man whose default setting was control and whose backup setting was more control. A man who had submitted to her assessments and taken his medication and answered her questions with the careful economy of someone who had learned that information was currency and spent it accordingly. He had never asked her for anything. She turned around. Rhett Moran was looking at the ceiling. Not at her. At the ceiling, with the focused stillness of someone who has just said something they are not entirely sure they meant to say out loud and is waiting to see what it costs them. "I sleep when you're here," he said, still not looking at her. "The nights you leave at midnight, I don't." She put her bag down. Into the chair. Not a word. She had taken the case on a Tuesday in October because her car needed new brakes and her student loans did not care about that, and the agency rate the Moran household offered was 3 times her hospital rate, which told her everything she needed to know about what kind of discretion she was being paid for. The brief had been precise and sparse. Gunshot wound. Left shoulder. Surgical repair completed 8 days prior. Postoperative nursing care. Evenings only. Discretion is non-negotiable. No other details provided, which was itself a detail. She had driven to the address and found a building with no visible front desk. A man in a dark jacket waiting at the elevator. And another man outside a 14th floor door who stepped aside without speaking. She had walked in expecting a cold. Expecting a patient who treated her like a function. Rhett Moran had looked at her the moment she entered. Not the room. Her. He was sitting up against the headboard in street clothes, already a problem. Post-op patients who dressed themselves this early were patients in denial, with his left arm braced against his side in the specific way of someone managing pain without acknowledging it. Jaw set. Expression controlled in the way expensive things are controlled, deliberately, with visible effort. She swept him in 3 seconds. Pale at the edges. Running on less than he was showing. "You're the nurse," he said. "You're in more pain than you're performing," she said back. A silence. His eyes recalibrated slightly. "The agency said you were good," he said. "The agency said you were cooperative," she replied. "We've both been misled. Shirt off, please. I need to see the wound." He looked at her for 1 beat longer than comfortable. Then he reached for his buttons. Working with difficult patients was not new to her patients who lied about pain levels, minimized symptoms, and refused medication on principle. She knew how to move around that defensiveness without triggering it. What she did not know, coming into that room on a Tuesday in October, was that Rhett Moran hadn't slept more than 3 consecutive hours in 8 months. That the shoulder was the least of what was wrong. That the thing keeping him awake had nothing to do with the surgery. She would learn all of that. Not that first night, but soon enough. Sienna thought she understood exactly what kind of case she'd walked into. She had no idea that by the time she finished her first assessment, Rhett Moran had already decided she was different from every person who had come through that door in a very long time and had no plan yet for what to do about that. The first 2 weeks were professional. Nearly convincingly so. She came at 7 each evening. Wound care, medication management, sleep monitoring. He was not a difficult patient in the obvious sense. He didn't complain, didn't demand, didn't make her feel uncomfortable in his house. He was difficult in the specific way of someone who had decided that cooperation extended only to the point where it stopped costing him anything. On the 4th night, she found his medication untouched on the nightstand. "You didn't take it," she said. "It makes me slow," he said. "It manages the pain that's keeping you awake," she said, pulling the chair from the corner and sitting in it. Not a nursing procedure, but some conversations required sitting down. "Your body repairs itself during deep sleep. You're not sleeping. The medication addresses the barrier. Not taking it is the reason you're 3 weeks post-op and still healing at the rate of someone who had the surgery yesterday." He looked at her with the slight recalibration she was starting to recognize. "You always talk to patients like that?" he said. "Like they're capable of understanding reason," she said. "Take the medication." He took it. Something settled into a rhythm after that. She asked direct questions. He gave answers that were partial but not dishonest. She pushed where warranted. He pushed back less often than she expected, which told her something about him that the brief hadn't. On the 9th night, she looked up from her notes and found him watching her from across the room. "What?" she said. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "Should I be? Most people are." She thought about it honestly. "Fear is a reasonable response to danger," she said. "I don't experience you as a danger. I experience you as a patient with a healing shoulder and unresolved sleep issues. Those aren't the same thing." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The geography of it, though the slight softening around the jaw she filed away without meaning to. "Nobody talks to me the way you do," he said. "I talk to everyone this way," she said. "It saves time." Back to her notes, then. But she felt the change in the room the way you feel a change in pressure, something opening where something had previously been sealed. She didn't name it. She sat with it the way she sat with most things that needed time before they became clear. Sienna told herself the shift she felt was simply a difficult patient beginning to trust their care. She told herself that until the night she realized she'd stayed 2 hours past her scheduled time without either of them noticing. It happened by increments the way most irreversible things do. A question about the old damage in his right shoulder, which became a conversation about the construction job he'd worked at 19, before everything else. His hands changed when he talked about that period, looser, less managed, the hands of a man remembering a version of himself that had belonged to him before he learned to be careful. She told him about the hospital where she'd done her residency, the overnight shifts, the attending who'd told her that the most important nursing skill was knowing when to stop talking. She'd never fully implemented that lesson, she admitted. He laughed, short and surprised, like it had left before he'd approved it. She filed it away. The laugh. She told herself that was professional. Observation. Relevant to patient rapport. Coffee had started appearing each evening when she arrived already made, exactly as she'd taken it on her 3rd night. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him for it. It just appeared on the table nearest the door at the right temperature. She noticed the way he knew the maintenance man's name and used it. The way the hallway lights were always turned down after 10, because someone on staff had mentioned headaches once. The way he kept the thermostat 2 degrees warmer than she suspected his own preference was, because Marcus ran cold. These were not the behaviors of a man who was only what his reputation said he was. What they were, instead, were the behaviors of someone who had learned, at some cost, that tending to people in secret was safer than doing it openly. That care given without witness couldn't be taken from you. Sienna understood that logic more than she wanted to. On the 19th night, she found him in the living room with a history book and a single lamp, and instead of going directly to her kit, she sat on the couch across from him and stayed there, reading her own notes until past midnight. At the door, leaving, he said without turning around, "Same time tomorrow?" "Same time tomorrow," she said. It became, without ceremony, their phrase. 3 weeks later, at 2:17 in the morning, he said 4 words she wasn't expecting. She put her bag down, into the chair. He was asleep in 20 minutes, the deep, even breathing of someone who had finally, briefly stopped fighting. She sat with it until she was certain he was under, and then she stayed a while longer because the room had the quality of something that didn't want to be left quickly. She drove home at 4 in the morning, sat in her car outside her building, identified an emotion she hadn't been expecting to be carrying. Sat with that too. Sienna told herself one late night was nothing more than a tired nurse making a reasonable accommodation for a patient who needed it. She had no idea that a man named Harkin had been watching that building for 3 years, and that her car parked there until dawn had just given him the pressure point he'd been looking for. The weeks that followed were the best and most confusing of Sienna's professional life. He started sleeping, not perfectly, not without interruption, but in a way that was measurable and real and directly correlated with the nights she stayed late. His shoulder healed at the rate it should have been healing from the start. She documented the improvement with the thoroughness of someone who had decided the data would keep her honest about what was actually happening. The data was not keeping her honest. One evening, he came to find her in the kitchen where she was making coffee. She had started doing that, somewhere in the past weeks, making coffee in his kitchen because it was easier than the vending machine at the hospital, and she had told herself comfortable lies about why, and he sat at the counter and watched her with an expression she had begun to recognize as the one he wore when he'd decided to say something he hadn't fully drafted yet. You worked a double today, he said. She looked at him. How do you know that? You pause more when you've worked a double. Same movement, more stops. He pushed a plate toward her. Something Rosa had left. She realized. Something he'd specifically asked to be kept warm. You should eat. Sienna looked at the plate. Then at him. You had food kept warm for me, she said. Is that a problem? It's very specific, she said. You're a specific person, he said. Sit down. She sat down and ate. The food was extraordinary and the kitchen was warm and outside the window November was doing what November did. And across the counter Rhett Moran was watching her with an expression that had no performance left in it. What do you notice about me? He said. Not casually. The genuine question of someone who rarely let anyone close enough to answer it honestly. Sienna set her fork down. That you're considerably kinder than your reputation allows, she said. That you tend to people quietly and don't want it remarked on. That you keep the temperature warmer than you prefer and you know the name of every person who works in this house. She paused. That you haven't told me yet why you stopped sleeping 8 months ago, and that it's the thing I'm most waiting for you to tell me. The kitchen was very quiet. My brother, Rhett said. Just that first. Then, 8 months ago. My call. Wrong one. He looked at the table. I've been replaying it. Sienna didn't rush toward it. She let the silence hold what it needed to. Does replaying it change anything? She asked eventually. No, he said. Then what does it do? He looked up. Keeps me company, he said. And there was something bleak and honest and tired that she recognized from other rooms, other patients, other versions of grief wearing different faces. You're staying awake as punishment, she said quietly. Not because you're still solving the problem. Because you've decided you don't deserve the rest. He didn't answer. Rhett. She kept her voice level the way she kept it level when she said the true thing that needed saying. You can't give him the time you weren't there by taking it from yourself. He looked at his hands. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all day finally arrived, hitting the kitchen window in steady sheets. Sienna did not move toward the door. She sat in the chair he'd pulled out for her, in a kitchen that had begun to feel, against all professional judgment, like somewhere she was supposed to be. Sienna believed the kitchen conversation was the turning point, a patient finally naming the wound that had nothing to do with his shoulder. She had no idea that across the city, Harkin had already run her plates, found her name, and was composing a message to her licensing board. The call came on a Wednesday morning, while she was still in his building, taking the elevator down after a night that had ended at 4. Male voice, unhurried, prepared. Ms. Cole, I understand you've been providing private care to Rhett Moran. I thought you should know that this creates complications professionally. Your licensing board would be very interested in the nature of that arrangement. She stood in the lobby. Let the silence run for 3 seconds. Who is this? She said. Someone who thinks you'd be better off finding a different client, he said. Before someone decides to make that choice for you. He hung up. 30 seconds. Then she went back upstairs. Rhett looked up when she walked back in. He read her face before she said a word. What happened, he said. She told him. All of it, word for word, in the order it happened, the way she gave assessments specific, linear, no editorializing. When she finished, he was very still. Harkin, he said. You know him. I know exactly who he is. Something moved through his expression, not rage. Something colder and more deliberate than rage. He's been looking for leverage for 3 years. He found it. His eyes came to hers. I'm sorry. This came from me. Yes, Sienna said. What are we doing about it? He blinked. He said. You heard me. Sit down. Tell me what you know about this man. I have professional defense resources and you have whatever you have. Between us, this problem should be considerably smaller by morning. He sat. He told her. She opened her laptop. They worked through it together at his kitchen table until past 4. Sienna navigating the nursing board's complaints procedure with the efficiency of someone who had once helped a colleague through exactly this process. Rhett working his phone with the compressed focus of a man who had decided something was going to be resolved tonight and meant it completely. At one point, he looked up from his phone and found her already looking at him. What, she said. You came back up, he said. Of course I came back up. You didn't have to, Rhett. She kept her voice even. Someone threatened me for caring about a person. I'm not rewarding that by disappearing. That's not who I am. She held his eyes. Are we doing this? Yes, he said. And then, quieter, thank you. She nodded and went back to her laptop. But she felt it, the thing that had been accumulating for weeks, the thing she had been documenting carefully under the professional heading of patient rapport and therapeutic relationship, and every other clinical phrase she'd learned for the feeling of meaning something to someone in the hours when they needed it most. She felt it land. Sienna believed their combined approach would end the threat cleanly. She had no idea that Harkin, sensing he was losing the leverage, had made one more move, and that it involved her mother. Her mother called at 9 the next morning. A man had phoned the house asking questions. About Sienna, about her employment, about her client. Her mother, 71 years old and raised in a tradition where you did not show strangers that they had reached you, had been polite, took a number, and called her daughter immediately. Sienna called Rhett before she had fully processed the call. He answered on the first ring. My mother, she said. He was already moving. She could hear it in the background. The shift of activity, Marcus's voice, the compression of a household that has switched modes. She's fine? He said. She's fine. She's angry, which means she's fine. I'll handle it, he said. I know, Sienna said. I'm coming over. She went over. Making coffee gave her hands somewhere to be. In her chair, she did not pretend the situation was other than what it was. When Rhett came back to the kitchen between calls and found her there, he exhaled, and she recognized, after weeks of watching him carry things, what release looked like on him. Your mother really is all right, he said the second time. She texted me a photo of her lunch, Sienna said. She's fine. She sounds like you. She raised me, Sienna said simply. By evening it was done. The complaint to the licensing board had been retracted before it was formally filed. The calls to her mother had stopped. Harkin had understood something, through channels Sienna didn't need to explain, about the cost of the direction he'd been moving in. Rhett found her in the kitchen. She was making dinner. She had started doing that weeks ago, and had stopped pretending there was a professional reason for it, and he stood in the doorway and looked at her with an expression that had nothing managed left in it. It's handled, he said. I know. Sit down. He sat. She put food in front of him. They ate in the comfortable quiet of two people who had been through something together and had come out the other side still wanting to be in the same room, which is not a small thing, and both of them knew it. Thank you, he said when the plates were empty, for coming back. Both times. I told you, she said. I don't leave things I've decided to stay in. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not reaching, not asking. Simply placing his hand over hers with the quiet certainty of someone who has finished deciding something and is acting on it. I know, he said. I'm counting on that. The agency closed the case the last Friday of December. Sienna drove home and stood in her kitchen and looked at the ordinary landscape of her ordinary life. The student loan statements on the counter. The Sunday call sticky note on the fridge. The radiator that had finally been fixed and now performed its one job in complete silence, which she had discovered was somehow more unsettling than when it was loud. Her phone lit up at 7. The case is closed, Rhett said. I know. You're not my nurse anymore. I'm aware. A pause that was entirely comfortable. I'd like to take you to dinner, he said. Not as a patient. As someone who has been trying to find the right words for about 6 weeks and has decided there is no right word, only the honest one. Sienna smiled at her silent radiator. What's the honest one? She said. That I haven't wanted to say the same time tomorrow to anyone in 8 months, he said. That I sleep now. That the chair by the window is yours and I'd like to stop pretending it isn't. A pause. That I would like very much to have dinner with you. Not as anything other than what we already are. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, December was doing what December did, going dark early and staying dark and making the inside of any room feel more complete by contrast. Same time tomorrow? Sienna said. A beat. Then his real laugh, unguarded, arrived without permission. Same time tomorrow, he said. She hung up the phone. A long moment in her kitchen, in the quiet of an evening that had become something it hadn't been that morning. Then she went to her closet and looked for something to wear. Some things stop being a choice. They just become where you are. They will tell you that nursing is a clinical discipline, that therapeutic presence has boundaries, that the right distance is the professional one, maintained carefully, for the protection of everyone involved. They are not wrong. But they are also describing the map, not the territory. And maps, Sienna had learned from a man who collected them, are always slightly wrong the moment they are printed. What she knew, standing in her kitchen in December, was this. She had sat in a chair at 2:17 in the morning because a man had asked her to stay, and she had stayed, and she had kept staying, not because the case required it and not because the agency told her to, but because some rooms, once you have sat in them honestly, become part of you in a way you do not fully understand until you try to leave. She had never fully tried to leave, and she thought that probably said everything. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely. Has someone ever asked you for something so small you almost said no, and staying turned into the most important thing you ever did? Tell me about it in the comments. Just one sentence. What was the small thing they asked for? I'll read every single one. The next story is already waiting. I think it's going to find you in a place you weren't expecting. Other things had accumulated over those 84 nights. She had learned that he read the last page of every history book first, which she discovered by accident when she found 3 bookmarks all placed at final chapters, and which she had not remarked on because some things are more interesting as observations than as conversations. His nightstand drawer held a photograph she had never seen directly, only the edge of it once when the drawer had been left open, and it had been there since before she arrived and would likely be there after she left, which meant it belonged to the part of his life that had nothing to do with the shoulder or the organization or any of the things the agency brief had prepared her for. Fear, she had come to understand, had exactly one shape for him, and it was not the one anyone in his world would have guessed. He was afraid of being the last person left. She understood that fear. She recognized it from the inside, the way you only recognize things you have carried yourself. Her own version was quieter, less dramatic. The dread of a woman who had spent 6 years being essential to everyone and intimate with no one, who had learned so thoroughly how to be present for other people's worst moments that she had forgotten to reserve any presence for her own ordinary ones. They were, she had realized somewhere around the 40th night, the same kind of lonely, just wearing different disguises. On the night she told him that, not directly, but in the way she said most things, sideways, through a story about a patient who had reminded her of herself. He had been very still for a long time. "You're not lonely now," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she said. "Good," he said, and that was all, and it was enough. The morning after the case closed, she arrived at his building at 7:15 carrying a pan of something she'd made at 6 in the morning because she hadn't slept and her hands needed somewhere to go. Marcus let her in without comment, which she appreciated. She took the elevator to the 14th floor. Rhett was already in the kitchen. He looked up when she came in, and the expression on his face, unguarded in the way of early morning, before the day has asked anyone to be anything yet, was one she had seen before, only in the chair by the window hours, the hours between 3 and 5 when the city was quiet and neither of them was performing. She put the pan on the counter. "You cooked," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "It's what I do." "What is it?" "Something my mother makes," she said. "For occasions." He looked at the pan, then at her. "What's the occasion?" Sienna thought about it. About 84 nights. About a chair that had become hers. About the laugh that arrived without permission and the photograph she'd never asked about and the crackers in the drawer and the temperature set 2 degrees warmer than his preference and the way he said "same time tomorrow" like it was a small thing when it was not small at all. "I thought we should have breakfast," she said, "before we figure out what comes next." Rhett looked at her for a long moment. His face settled into the expression she recognized now as the one he wore when he'd finished deciding. "Okay," he said. He got the plates. She served the food. Outside the kitchen window, December was still doing what it did, dark and cold and entirely indifferent. But the kitchen was warm. The coffee was already made. The chair at the corner of the table was the one she always sat in. Some things stop being chosen. They simply become where you are. She sat down. She stayed. She had never left and was not going to. Healing is not a single event. She had come to understand in those months. It is not the moment the wound closes or the bandage comes off or the agency files the case as complete. It is the accumulation of small, consistent acts of medication taken, sleep attempted, honest things said in kitchen chairs at 2 in the morning until the person being cared for can no longer tell where the care ends and their own strength begins. That was, her best instructor had told her once, the whole point. She had not fully understood it then. She had understood the clinical mechanics, the physiological truth of it, the textbook version. She had not understood what it felt like from the inside to be the one doing the caring and to realize, sometime around the 40th night, that the line between caregiver and person being cared for was considerably less fixed than the training materials suggested. Rhett had healed. That was real and documented and visible in every metric she tracked. She had also, quietly and without planning to, healed something in herself that she had not known was injured. The calculus she'd built over 6 years being useful in other people's worst moments and forgetting, somewhere along the way, to be present in her own ordinary ones. Sitting in a chair at 2:17 in the morning because a man had asked her to stay, she had remembered. Her mother would call on Sunday and ask how she was, and would hear something different in her voice, this time less efficient, less capable sounding, more like a person who had recently been reminded that she was allowed to be one. That 91-year-old patient, the one who still insisted on walking unassisted, had told her once that the most dangerous thing a person could do was get so good at managing alone that they forgot what it felt like to be helped. Rhett, in the kitchen, getting the plates. Sometimes the most dangerous thing was also the most necessary one. She had walked into a room on a Tuesday in October expecting a difficult client and a straightforward case. What she had found instead was a chair by a window and a man who said same time tomorrow like it was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Sitting in the warm kitchen in December with her mother's food on the plates and the coffee already made and the city outside doing what cities do regardless, she understood it was the only thing. She stayed. She had never left. She was not going to.